We have breaking news to bring you right now. In the ongoing conflict with Iran, President Trump has just announced a major shift in military posture. Moments ago, the president declared that Project Freedom, the U.S. military mission escorting commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz, is being suspended. Garrett Hake joins us now with this developing story. Garrett, walk our viewers through exactly what is unfolding here. Tom, this represents a remarkable reversal from an administration that had, just hours earlier, positioned this operation as a cornerstone of its national security agenda. Two cabinet secretaries were dispatched to briefings today specifically to defend Project Freedom as a vital new priority. The U.S. military had successfully escorted two ships through the strait yesterday.
Breaking news we want to get to right now. In the war with Iran, President Trump moments ago announcing that he is pausing Project Freedom, that the U.S. military mission to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Garrett Hake joins us now with this developing news. So walk our viewers through, Garrett, what exactly is happening here?
Tom, this is a stunning reversal from the president, whose administration put not one but two cabinet secretaries out today for briefings defending this idea of Project Freedom as a key new administration priority, that the U.S. military might would be used to protect ships bottled up in the Persian Gulf since the start of this war as they transited out of the Strait of Hormuz. They did so successfully with two ships yesterday, but today just one ship passed through the strait. And now the president says that at the request of Pakistan and other countries, and he says because progress is being made in talks with Iran, this effort will be put on pause to see if a deal can be.
With one additional vessel completing transit earlier today. Yet now the president states that at the request of Pakistan and other nations, and citing progress in diplomatic discussions with Iran, this entire effort will be placed on hold to explore whether a negotiated settlement can be reached. This abrupt pivot raises fundamental questions about decision-making processes within this administration. Consider what a functioning second-term presidency typically looks like at this juncture. A president who has secured re-election should have a fully staffed team, a clearly defined agenda, and department heads capable of executing policy while providing the stable leadership that allows the chief executive to focus on the nation's most pressing challenges. In this instance, those challenges include active military hostilities with Iran, an economy producing historically unfavorable approval ratings, and a midterm election 6 months away that the Speaker of the House has publicly characterized as existential for this presidency. That is the standard against which this administration should be measured. That is what voters who supported Donald Trump in 2024 had every right to expect. What they are witnessing, however, departs substantially from that benchmark. What they are actually observing is a sustained pattern of senior-level dismissals that has now removed 5 or more high-ranking officials since January 2025, including both the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security within weeks of each other. This churn has generated extensive coverage of executive branch instability that political strategists across the spectrum privately describe as a communications crisis for an administration already burdened with substantial difficulties.
The administration's approach to the strait closure has shifted repeatedly by the day, by the week, and in today's case, seemingly by the hour. As officials grappled with how to address the maritime chokehold Iran has maintained without escalating to renewed combat operations, the emerging solution appears to be a return to precisely the status quo that existed before Sunday's operation was announced. Earlier today, administration officials expressed uncertainty about diplomatic prospects and used harsh language regarding Iranian leadership. The transition from that posture to this announcement constitutes an extraordinary policy reversal. We had heard Secretary Rubio in the briefing room suggesting that positions remain far apart.
The administration's priorities and solutions for the strait being closed have varied day by day, week by week. In the case of today, perhaps even hour by hour, as they've tried to figure out how to release the chokehold that Iran has had on that waterway without resuming combat operations. Now the solution seems to be they're going to go right back to where the status quo was on Sunday, before this operation was announced. He wasn't sure if there could be a diplomatic agreement and calling Iran's leaders insane. So from that just a few hours ago to this is an enormous policy change.
Yeah, and I was going to say, because we all heard, at least us in the news that were watching Secretary Rubio there in the briefing room, it sounded like they were still very far apart. This sounds like maybe there's some.
This latest development, however, introduces a note of potential optimism regarding diplomatic possibilities. Before we continue, let us address an important consideration regarding information consumption.
Many Americans have grown skeptical of traditional media outlets. Independent platforms have emerged to provide alternative coverage emphasizing direct reporting and contextual analysis. For those seeking supplementary perspectives on current events, numerous independent newsletters and community-driven platforms offer additional viewpoints. The media landscape continues evolving, and citizens increasingly curate their own information sources. Now, to the core developments, Pam Bondi has departed as Attorney General of the United States. The individual overseeing the Department of Justice, directing federal law enforcement, and managing the most consequential legal portfolio in American government was removed from her position in early April 2026. The official characterization described her as transitioning to the private sector, terminology Washington employs when acknowledging a dismissal without explicitly stating the circumstances that the public deserves to understand regarding why the nation's top law enforcement official no longer serves. This transition followed intensive questioning during congressional hearings focused on the handling of Epstein-related documents and Department of Justice conduct under her leadership. Her testimony apparently failed to meet administrative expectations. Now she exits, and the nation must identify a replacement attorney general amid active military conflict, economic turbulence, midterm campaign season, and ongoing legal proceedings that the Department of Justice is expected to manage on the administration's behalf. Bondi's departure did not occur in isolation. It followed the March 2026 dismissal of Kristi Noem from the Department of Homeland Security. Noem, the former South Dakota governor who represented one of the president's most visible and steadfast second-term cabinet selections, had been tasked with bringing forceful leadership to immigration enforcement among the administration's most prominent second-term priorities. Her removal stemmed from multiple converging factors: fatalities among immigration agents that triggered scrutiny of operational decisions and management practices, personal conduct questions, including relationship controversies that created political complications, and inquiries regarding departmental financial stewardship. And prior to Noem and Bondi, additional departures occurred. Mike Waltz, Kash Patel. The Wall Street Journal has chronicled the internal conflicts, the dismissals, the pattern of senior-level exits that now reaches double digits among officials who were expected to serve through the second term. 5 or more high-ranking removals since January 2025, within an administration simultaneously managing warfare, economic crisis, and an approaching midterm election. This does not constitute a personnel management strategy. This represents gradual administrative deterioration. The implications for actual governmental operations, for agencies tasked with implementing policy on immigration, law enforcement, national security, and economic matters warrant thorough and sustained examination. Consider the operational reality. The Department of Justice does not operate autonomously. The Department of Homeland Security does not function independently. When leadership at these agencies is removed and replaced with interim appointees or new nominees requiring confirmation, institutional disruption follows. Strategic direction becomes uncertain. Career personnel operate without clear guidance. Ongoing legal and operational priorities are managed by individuals who may lack full authority or comprehensive institutional knowledge. Multiply this disruption across 5 or more agencies concurrently, and the picture emerges of an executive branch functioning substantially below its capacity to advance the president's agenda. In the context of active military engagement, deteriorating economic conditions, and an approaching midterm election, diminished executive branch capacity is not merely theoretical. It produces tangible consequences for real decisions affecting actual citizens. Today we examine every dimension of this situation: the Bondi dismissal, the Noem removal, the broader pattern, what it reveals about administrative operations, and what it signifies for the Trump agenda's prospects over the next 6 months. Let us construct this analysis thoroughly, because comprehending why the cabinet dismissal pattern warrants serious concern requires understanding the specific circumstances of each major departure, the institutional context surrounding those exits, and the political and operational consequences that accumulate when senior leadership is lost across multiple major departments in rapid succession. Begin with Pam Bondi and the particular circumstances of her departure, because the Attorney General position transcends ordinary cabinet rank. It represents the most legally and institutionally sensitive role in the executive branch. The Attorney General directs the Department of Justice, meaning responsibility for all federal law enforcement and prosecutorial activity falls to this office, including prosecutions, investigations, carrying the most direct political significance for the administration, Epstein-related legal matters, various investigations targeting perceived adversaries, immigration enforcement litigation, and ongoing constitutional confrontations with federal judges regarding executive authority that we have addressed in previous coverage. When the Attorney General is dismissed or transitions to the private sector, the preferred euphemism, institutional disruption at the Department of Justice, is immediate and substantial. Every ongoing matter must be reassessed for potential directional changes under new leadership. Every career official immediately begins recalibrating behavior to accommodate uncertainty about forthcoming priorities. Every external party engaging with the department, Federal judges, congressional oversight committees, opposing counsel, active litigants adjust their assessment of departmental positions and commitments based on recognition that the individual who established those commitments no longer possesses authority to uphold them. The congressional hearing context preceding Bondi's departure merits detailed examination. The hearings regarding Epstein document handling and Department of Justice conduct were not routine oversight proceedings. They were intensive, focused, and generated exchanges that placed cabinet officials in positions of either defending genuinely challenging decisions or providing responses that contradicted the administration's preferred narrative on politically sensitive topics. For Bondi, the Epstein document handling represented a particularly acute vulnerability. As we detailed previously, the disclosure process generated substantial controversy within the president's own political base, with figures such as Marjorie Taylor Greene publicly criticizing outcomes and the president himself employing severe characterizations regarding the situation. In congressional testimony about these events, Bondi faced the nearly impossible task of simultaneously satisfying the administration's narrative control objectives, meeting legal obligations to testify truthfully under oath, and addressing oversight committees' demands for specific, responsive answers to pointed questions. Maintaining this balance is extraordinarily difficult. When performance in this balancing act fails to satisfy the individual at the top, when aggressive questioning produces responses the administration finds problematic, the transition to the private sector follows. This sequence illustrates as clearly as any example how this administration approaches political accountability. The individual occupying the position when difficult decisions were made absorbs the political consequences through dismissal, while the individual who directed those decisions from above proceeds to the next episode. The Kristi Noem situation at the Department of Homeland Security warrants parallel examination because shares structural features with Bondi's departure while being driven by different specific precipitating factors. Noem's exit was tied to multiple overlapping challenges, fatalities among immigration enforcement agents that generated scrutiny of operational decisions and management practices, personal conduct questions including relationship controversies that created reputational complications, and inquiries regarding the handling of departmental financial resources. The combination of operational failures, personal controversies, and financial irregularity questions proves particularly damaging for any cabinet official, because critics can simultaneously argue that the agency is poorly managed operationally, that the leader's personal conduct reflects deficient judgment, and that institutional resources are improperly stewarded. For Noem specifically, the operational dimension carries particular significance because the Department of Homeland Security's immigration enforcement mission ranks among the administration's highest-profile second-term priorities. The aggressive deportation agenda, the border security emphasis, the utilization of departmental resources to implement mass removal programs, all these priorities flow through the agency she directed. Agent fatalities under circumstances generating intense scrutiny, combined with legal battles around deportation orders that we covered in our previous reporting, created an environment where the agency's operational performance faced scrutiny levels that her personal and financial controversies made impossible to manage effectively. She became a political liability, and in this political environment, liabilities are transitioned out. The broader pattern of 5 or more high-ranking dismissals since January 2025 deserves examination as a pattern rather than as isolated personnel decisions, because the pattern reveals something significant about administrative management. The Wall Street Journal's reporting on internal conflicts provides the clearest external documentation of what drives this dismissal pattern. Not merely individual performance failures, but sustained internal conflict among different administration factions, producing casualties at the senior leadership level, with frequency and intensity unusual even by the standards of an administration historically tolerant of internal discord. The documented conflicts appear to reflect several simultaneous tension types. There is tension between the administration's loyalist faction, officials whose primary qualification is personal allegiance to the president and alignment with the political movement, and officials bringing institutional knowledge and professional expertise who may be more inclined to resist legally or operationally problematic decisions. There is tension between domestic policy priorities and the foreign policy and national security demands of an administration simultaneously managing active warfare and multiple diplomatic crises. And there is tension between the administration's political imperatives in a midterm environment, the need to project competence, stability, and governing effectiveness, and the personal and political dynamics of a leadership culture that responds to perceived disloyalty with public denunciation and dismissal rather than internal management and course correction. The president's social media responses to these departures, the posts about disloyalty, the institutional resistance framing, the pattern of publicly attacking officials no longer positioned to defend themselves effectively, constitute part of this story and warrant examination as a management phenomenon. When a president responds to senior official departures by posting about disloyalty and attributing exits to institutional resistance, several functions are performed simultaneously. The president signals to remaining officials the consequences of being perceived as insufficiently loyal, which alters their behavior in ways that may not prove operationally beneficial. The president provides a narrative framework for the political base that attributes departures to institutional enemies' machinations rather than management failures or poor personnel decisions, protecting the president's own accountability for appointments made and decisions directed. And the president reinforces the loyalty culture dynamic, the environment where public denunciation of departing officials serves as both punishment and warning to those who remain. However, this culture, while serving certain political functions, carries significant operational costs. It makes officials less likely to provide candid advice when that advice might prove unwelcome. It makes officials more focused on self-preservation and narrative management than on the substantive work of their agencies. And it creates an environment where the most capable individuals, those with the most professional alternatives, are also the most likely to depart before becoming the next person publicly denounced for disloyalty. The Iran conflict and economic crisis context in which all these dismissals occur amplifies their significance beyond what the same departure pattern would represent in a more stable governing environment. The administration is managing active military conflict requiring sustained coherent direction from the Department of Defense, the State Department, the intelligence community, and the Department of Homeland Security simultaneously. It is managing economic crisis requiring coherent, coordinated response from the Treasury, the Commerce Department, and various economic agencies whose actions affect inflation, employment, and consumer prices. And it is doing both with a Department of Justice in leadership transition, a Department of Homeland Security in leadership transition, and multiple other agencies operating below normal capacity because of departures and the uncertainty they generate. This combination sustained institutional disruption at the leadership level during acute external crisis genuinely threatens the administration's ability to manage these crises effectively. Insiders who have spoken with various outlets have cited both Iran tensions and policy implementation obstacles created by internal conflicts as significant factors in specific departures that have occurred. The dismissals are not happening despite the crisis. In some cases, they are happening because of the crisis, because the pressure of managing genuinely difficult situations is exposing management failures and conflict dynamics that a less demanding environment might have allowed to remain submerged. Let us consolidate this analysis with 5 core points capturing what matters most about this situation and what the real consequences are for the administration, for the Republican Party, and for the American public heading into the most consequential political period of this second term. Point 1. The serial dismissal pattern is not evidence of an administration strengthening itself through house cleaning. It is evidence of an administration consuming its own leadership capacity at a rate incompatible with effective governance of a country facing the challenges currently confronting the United States. There exists a version of frequent cabinet changes that represents strong management, a president who sets high standards, identifies underperformance quickly, and replaces officials not delivering results with individuals who can. That version produces improved institutional performance over time. The version we are observing in this second term does not match that description. The officials being removed are not primarily being replaced because their agencies underperformed on measurable operational metrics. They are being removed because of congressional hearing performances, because of political controversy around sensitive topics, because of personal conduct problems, and because of internal factional conflicts that external reporting has documented. These are political management reasons, not operational performance reasons. And when officials are dismissed for political management reasons rather than operational performance reasons, the replacement process is driven by the same political management logic, finding someone who can survive the political environment better, not necessarily someone who can run the agency better. Applied repeatedly across multiple agencies, this logic produces a cabinet increasingly optimized for political survivability and decreasingly optimized for the substantive work of governance. This trade-off carries real costs that manifest in governmental decision-making quality, in policy agenda implementation, and ultimately in outcomes that voters experience and evaluate. Point 2. The loss of both the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security within weeks of each other during active warfare and economic crisis represents simultaneous disruption of the 2 cabinet departments most directly responsible for the administration's highest-profile domestic priorities. The operational consequences of this disruption will be felt for months, regardless of how quickly and effectively replacements are confirmed and installed. The Department of Justice is managing active litigation on deportations, on various investigations, on constitutional confrontations with federal judges, and on the domestic legal dimensions of the Iran conflict. The Department of Homeland Security is implementing the mass deportation agenda that represents one of the president's signature second-term commitments already under intense legal challenge from multiple directions. Both agencies require stable authoritative leadership to navigate their current challenges. Leadership transitions, even well-managed ones with smooth confirmation processes and experienced replacements, create periods of institutional uncertainty during which career staff operate without clear strategic direction. Ongoing matters are handled by individuals who may lack full context or full authority, and external parties adjust their behavior based on uncertainty about who is actually in charge and what they will prioritize. These uncertainty periods are expensive operationally. They allow ongoing problems to compound without decisive leadership response. They create openings for opponents in courts, in Congress, in foreign governments to move more aggressively because they recognize that institutional capacity to respond is temporarily diminished. The administration is currently experiencing these uncertainty periods in two of its most critical agencies simultaneously while managing active warfare and approaching midterms. Point 3. The president's institutional resistance framing of these departures. The narrative that officials were brought down by institutional enemies rather than by their own failures or administrative management decisions proves politically useful in the short term but operationally counterproductive in ways that compound the governing problems the dismissal pattern already creates. The institutional resistance narrative serves a specific and important political function. It tells the political base that administrative difficulties are not evidence of poor governance, but evidence of the magnitude of institutional opposition to the president's agenda, evidence that entrenched interests are fighting back, that institutional actors are undermining loyalists, that every departure and every failure actually proves how dangerous and powerful the forces aligned against the president truly are. This narrative proves emotionally satisfying and politically mobilizing for the committed base, but it also tells everyone inside the administration that survival depends not on performing well on substantive agency work, but on maintaining the appearance of personal loyalty and avoiding association with any outcome that might be attributed to institutional sabotage. This incentive structure, optimized for appearing loyal rather than performing effectively, is precisely the opposite of the management culture desired within an administration, attempting to implement a complex agenda during acute national challenge. And every social media post about disloyalty reinforces this incentive structure, pushing the administration further toward loyalty theater rather than operational effectiveness. Point 4. The midterm political consequences of the serial dismissal pattern are significant and are being felt in precisely the competitive districts and with precisely the voter demographic groups that will determine House control in November. Republican incumbents in competitive suburban districts are attempting to make affirmative cases for re-election in an environment where the administration they are associated with has experienced 5 or more high-ranking cabinet dismissals in roughly 15 months, has lost its attorney general amid congressional hearing controversies over document handling, has lost its Homeland Security secretary amid agent fatalities and personal conduct controversies, and is projecting an image of internal chaos that sits in direct contrast with the competence and stability that suburban voters, typically educated, professional, and attentive to governance quality, seek in the government they are asked to support at the ballot box. The institutional resistance narrative that resonates at political rallies does not translate identically at suburban town halls where constituents ask why the administration has cycled through 5 cabinet secretaries in 15 months and whether that instability affects the government's ability to manage warfare, control inflation, and deliver essential services. These are legitimate questions. They are the questions swing voters ask, and the answers available to Republican incumbents are not comfortable ones given the current record. Point 5. The broader story that the Bondi and Noem dismissals tell about an administration that responds to political difficulty by sacrificing personnel rather than changing direction, that uses public denunciation of departing officials as a political management tool, and that is consuming its own institutional leadership capacity at a pace incompatible with effective second-term governance, is the story that will define how historians and voters ultimately evaluate this period of this presidency. Every administration experiences personnel turnover. Every second term sees officials depart for various reasons. But the specific pattern we are observing, the frequency, the public nature, the severe characterizations, the institutional deflection, the coincidence of multiple simultaneous agency leadership vacuums during active external crises, adds up to something exceeding normal administrative churn. It reflects a specific and consequential governance approach that prioritizes political management over institutional effectiveness. The individuals paying the price for this approach are not primarily the officials being dismissed. They are the career staff in affected agencies attempting to implement complex policy agendas without stable leadership direction. They are the Americans depending on those agencies, on the Department of Justice for legal protection and rule of law, on the Department of Homeland Security for border security and immigration management, who are receiving less effective service because agency leadership remains in recurring turmoil, and then are the Republican candidates in competitive districts being asked to defend a governing record that includes serial cabinet instability as one of its most visible and most easily communicated features. The deterioration pattern that critics describe is not exaggerated rhetoric. It is an accurate characterization of what the evidence demonstrates, and the question of whether the administration can stabilize before November, can stop consuming its own leadership, can project the kind of competent and stable governance that midterm voters reward. This is among the most important open questions in American politics currently. Based on the trajectory of the past 15 months, the answer remains uncertain.